Sophie was only 22, but life had already weighed heavily on her. Her family lived in a small, dusty village where the red sand seemed to seep into every part of life, creating a sense of desolation. Sophie had always dreamed of a different life, one filled with hope and peace, but instead she was trapped in a harsh reality. Her father, once a kind farmer, had become a cruel, broken man after the death of Sophie's mother 5 years ago. The once warm and welcoming home had turned cold, filled with shouting and the constant smell of alcohol. Sophie's father, Mr. Thompson, had remarried a wicked woman, Mrs. Grace, who despised Sophie and made her life a living nightmare. Sophie was forced to cook, fetch firewood, clean the compound, and tend to the farm, working from dawn till dusk. She was barely given food, and she slept on the cold floor with no comfort or affection. Everyone in the village knew of her suffering, but no one dared to speak up. They were all too afraid of her father's wrath, and so Sophie endured her misery in silence. As the years passed, Sophie's pain deepened and she began to lose hope. Then came James, a young man who worked on the farm. He was dressed in old clothes, his shoes worn out from the long days in the fields, and his face marked by exhaustion. He had been working alongside Sophie's father for months, clearing bushes, planting cassava, and carrying heavy loads from sunup to sundown. Despite his hard work, Mr. Thompson never paid James, always making excuses and pushing back the payment. Sophie saw James's frustration growing, and she could feel the tension in the air as he asked for his wages one afternoon. Mr. Thompson, looking around in his usual drunken stupor, smirked when he saw Sophie working nearby and made an offer that would change her life forever. "You want money?" Mr. Thompson sneered. "Take that girl instead. She's good for nothing. Let her go with you to the city. That's your payment." Sophie's heart shattered as she looked at her father. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She dropped the broom she had been holding, her hands trembling, as she begged her father. "Daddy, please no," but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Her father shouted at her to shut up, dismissing her as if she were nothing more than an object. Mrs. Grace folded her arms and smiled coldly, seeing Sophie's departure as one less mouth to feed. Sophie was crushed, but her father's words were final. With tears in her eyes, Sophie packed a small bag and left without a single word of comfort from her family. She didn't even get a goodbye from her little brother Sam, who was crying quietly behind the house as she walked away. She followed James to the city, unsure of what awaited her, but praying for peace in her heart, hoping that this man wouldn't be as cruel as her father had been. The journey to the city was long and tiring. Sophie sat quietly in the bus, staring out the window at the unfamiliar landscape passing by. She had never been to the city before, and everything felt so foreign. The towering buildings, the fast-moving cars, and the bustling crowds overwhelmed her. She was a small-town girl used to the quiet, dusty roads of her village, and now she was thrust into this noisy, chaotic world. But as the bus rumbled on, Sophie tried to block out the doubts and fears swirling in her mind. She didn't know what to expect, but deep down she prayed to God for guidance. She prayed that James wouldn't be like her father, that he wouldn't hurt her or treat her as a slave. She couldn't bear the thought of living through another round of suffering. When they finally reached the city, Sophie was astonished by how different it was. The streets were lined with tall buildings, and the noise of honking cars and shouting people was overwhelming. She held her bag tightly, not knowing where she was going, but feeling lost in the crowds. James led her through a quiet street away from the noise and stopped at a big black gate. As the gate creaked open, Sophie's mouth fell open in disbelief. The compound inside was beautiful, with neat flower beds and a small fountain in the corner. The house was white and elegant, looking like something out of a movie. They walked past the grand house to a small building at the back, where James said he lived. It wasn't large, but it was clean and peaceful, with a comfortable bed and a roof that didn't leak. For the first time in years, Sophie felt a small sense of peace. It wasn't much compared to the life she had dreamed of, but it was a relief to know she wouldn't be beaten, shouted at, or left hungry. Sophie's life had just taken an unexpected turn. Though she had been forced into this situation, the new environment, The kindness from James and the calm of the small house behind the main building began to give her hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe again. She whispered a silent prayer, asking God to give her the strength to endure whatever came next. The ride to the city was long, and Sophie's heart was a whirlwind of emotions. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn, but the journey ahead was filled with uncertainty. James didn't say much during the trip, keeping to himself as he drove through the busy streets, but Sophie couldn't help but notice the subtle kindness in his gestures. He would glance at her from time to time, his eyes filled with empathy, though he didn't push her to talk. When they arrived in the city, Sophie's mind was overwhelmed by the contrast. The city was fast-paced and chaotic, with towering buildings, endless streams of cars, and a constant hum of life she had never experienced. Yet despite the overwhelming nature of it all, James led her to a quiet part of the city, far from the busy streets and noise. They reached a small, peaceful neighborhood, and James stopped in front of a modest house, nothing too extravagant but comforting in its simplicity. He opened the door and showed her around. The walls of the house were painted in soft, calming colors, and the furniture, though minimal, was neat and arranged with care. The small kitchen had a warm glow to it, and the bathroom was clean and functional. It wasn't much, but Sophie felt an immediate sense of relief. After the years of torment and neglect she had endured, this place felt like an oasis of peace. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she was able to exhale deeply and let her shoulders relax. The overwhelming tension she had carried for so long began to dissipate. As James showed her around, she noticed how respectful he was. He didn't try to push her into conversations or actions she wasn't ready for. He simply allowed her space to adjust. He treated her like a person with dignity, a stark contrast to how she had been treated by her father and stepmother. Sophie had spent her entire life fearing the next shouting match or the next cruel comment. She had grown used to a silence that was often broken only by the anger in her father's voice or the coldness of Mrs. Grace's sneers. But now, in this small home, she found herself in a quiet space where her thoughts weren't interrupted by insults or demands. It was as if the chaos of her past had been left behind and she could finally begin to breathe again. She took small steps each day, exploring the neighborhood, learning how to cook with the ingredients in the kitchen, and even starting to get used to the feeling of having her own space. For the first time, Sophie felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was living. She woke up in the morning feeling the warmth of the sun shining through the window instead of the cold emptiness she had known before. The quiet comfort of the home provided a stark contrast to the life she had left behind in the village, and every day Sophie felt a little more at peace with her decision to follow James to the city. As days passed, James's kindness became even more apparent. He didn't ask for anything in return for the shelter he had given her. He simply wanted to help. One evening, as they sat together over dinner, James spoke more about his life. He told Sophie that he wasn't the poor worker she might have thought him to be. In fact, he was quite the opposite. James had been saving money for years, working hard and keeping his financial ambitions a secret. He had a plan. James wanted to start his own business, something that had been a dream of his for a long time. He had kept his wealth hidden because he wanted to see if Sophie would care for him without knowing his true status. Sophie listened intently, her heart racing with surprise and confusion. She had always known James was different from other men, but to learn that he had been hiding such a significant part of his life was both shocking and humbling. For the first time, Sophie realized that James wasn't just a kind-hearted man. He was a man with goals, dreams, and a sense of responsibility that went beyond mere survival. He had worked hard to get where he was, and his humble demeanor made him even more admirable. He wasn't showing off his wealth or status. He was focused on his future, and more importantly, on how he could help others. Sophie's respect for him grew in that moment. She had been so used to men using power, wealth, and control to manipulate others, especially women. But here was James, someone who had all the right to flaunt his success, but chose instead to be humble and treat others with kindness and dignity. The realization that James saw Sophie as an equal, not as someone beneath him, warmed her heart. Sophie's understanding of James grew deeper as the days turned into weeks. She began to notice the little things he did that showed his generosity and care. He made sure she had everything she needed to feel comfortable and secure. He asked for her opinion on things and genuinely listened to what she had to say. James didn't treat her as a burden or someone he had to care for out of obligation. He treated her as a partner. She could see the quiet strength he carried within him, and in turn she felt herself opening up to him more each day. They would sit together in the evenings, talking about their hopes for the future, sharing their dreams and supporting each other's ambitions. For the first time in Sophie's life, she felt like she mattered to someone. It wasn't just the material comfort that made Sophie feel at peace in the city. It was the emotional stability that James provided. The feeling of safety, respect, and mutual care was something she had never experienced before. It was as if she had been given a new chance at life, a chance to heal from the wounds of her past. And with James by her side, Sophie began to believe that maybe her life could be different from the one she had known in the village. The first few weeks in the city felt like a dream for Sophie. She had settled into the small, peaceful home that James had provided, and every day felt like a step closer to healing. For the first time in her life, Sophie was treated with respect. She began cooking meals for James, learning new recipes, and even jotting them down in a small notebook that he had bought for her. She had never known such a sense of peace, and for the first time she allowed herself to hope for a better future, but her newfound sense of security was soon threatened by a person Sophie never expected. Daniel, Mrs. Walker's son. Daniel was everything James was not, where James was humble and respectful. Daniel was confident to the point of arrogance. His charm was undeniable, and he exuded a kind of wealth and entitlement that Sophie had never been exposed to. It wasn't long before he began showing interest in Sophie, though it quickly became clear that his interest was far from innocent. At first it seemed harmless enough. He would greet her with a smile, compliment her cooking, and ask about her life. But as time went on, his behavior shifted, and Sophie began to feel uncomfortable. He started making remarks about her beauty comments that she found increasingly inappropriate. He'd comment on how stunning she looked, how lucky James was to have such a woman by his side. Sophie tried to brush it off at first, hoping it was just idle flattery, but she could feel the undercurrent of something more sinister in his words. One afternoon, as Sophie was in the kitchen preparing lunch, Daniel walked in unannounced. He leaned against the doorway, his eyes lingering on her as she chopped vegetables. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine as he spoke, his voice smooth and casual, but with a hint of something darker beneath it. "You know, Sophie," he began, his tone suddenly more intimate, "you deserve so much more than what James can offer you." Sophie froze the knife still in her hand. She had heard rumors about Daniel's flirtations with the house staff, but she had hoped it wouldn't be directed at her. "I can give you everything you've ever wanted," he continued, stepping a little closer. "Money, luxury, a life full of opportunities. All you have to do is leave James and come with me." Sophie's heart raced, and she tried to keep her voice steady as she looked at Daniel. She knew what he was offering: comfort, a life of ease, everything she had ever dreamed of, and yet she felt repulsed by the offer. She had seen the way Daniel looked at her, the way he spoke to her, and she realized that his promises were not about love or respect. They were about control. Sophie stood tall, her back straight as she set down the knife. She looked Daniel in the eye, her voice firm and unwavering. "I'm not interested," she said quietly but resolutely. "I am committed to James, and our relationship is built on trust, respect, and love." The words came easily, and she realized as she spoke them just how much she meant them. Daniel's face shifted, his smile faltering for just a moment. He clearly didn't expect rejection, especially not from someone he viewed as beneath him. But Sophie didn't care. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her. "You don't know what you're giving up." Daniel said, his voice suddenly cold, a hint of menace creeping into his words. "James may not have much now, but what does he really offer you? A future with him is nothing but a dream I could give you the life you deserve." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. She knew what Daniel was trying to do. He was trying to make her doubt her own choices, trying to make her question her worth. But Sophie was no longer the frightened, uncertain girl who had arrived in the city months ago. She had found a place of peace, and she had found someone who truly valued her for who she was not, for what she could give him. "I'm not interested in what you have to offer." Sophie said, her voice steady and unwavering. "James is the man I choose, and I believe in him. I believe in our future together, no matter how uncertain it may seem. Now I am not someone who can be bought." Sophie turned away from Daniel, her heart heavy with the weight of his words, but resolute in her decision. She had been manipulated by men before, used and discarded, but she would not allow it to happen again. She knew the value of true love now, and nothing, no promise of money, no offer of luxury could make her abandon that. The following days were tense. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was watching her, waiting for her to change her mind. He would find excuses to stop by the boys' quarters, lingering in the hallways and making Sophie uncomfortable with his presence. But Sophie refused to let him affect her. She continued to cook, to clean, and to spend time with James, reinforcing the bond that had been growing between them. When James would ask how her day had been, Sophie would tell him everything, and James would listen intently, never dismissing her concerns. He was the one who showed her kindness, who gave her peace, and who made her feel valued. Despite Daniel's manipulative advances, Sophie reaffirmed her commitment to James. She knew that their love, built on trust and respect, was worth more than any promise Daniel could make. Sophie's resolve only grew stronger as she continued to stand by James. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she was no longer afraid Daniel's offers were empty, his words laced with manipulation, and Sophie was wise enough now to recognize them for what they were. She had found a love that was real, a love that respected her, and she was not about to let anyone, not even Daniel, take that away from her. As she and James spent more time together planning their future and dreaming of what they could build, Sophie felt more secure in her decision than ever. She had chosen love, and she knew deep down that it would carry her through whatever came next. Sophie had begun to settle into her new life in the city, growing more comfortable with each passing day. She had never felt this safe before this, at peace. The small home she shared with James had become her sanctuary, a place where she could let go of the fears and insecurities that had plagued her for years. They had started to form a quiet, beautiful bond, one built on trust, respect, and an understanding of each other's struggles. James treated her like an equal, something she had never known from a man before. He respected her space, her opinions, and her dreams, and for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt like she was truly seen. It seemed like nothing could threaten their growing connection, but little did she know that James was harboring a secret one that would shake the very foundation of what she thought she knew about him. It was a warm afternoon when James decided it was time to come clean. Sophie had just finished preparing dinner, the aroma of spices filling the air, when James came home earlier than usual. His face, usually so calm and assured, looked troubled as he sat down beside her at the small table they had shared countless times before. Sophie noticed immediately James. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the pot she was holding. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes full of uncertainty. "Sophie, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice heavy. "I haven't been completely honest with you. I've been hiding something about myself, and I think it's time you knew the truth." Sophie felt a pang of anxiety in her chest. She had always felt that James was different, that there was more to him than he let on, but she had never imagined it would be something like this. James took a deep breath and began to explain. "I'm not just a poor security guard, Sophie. My mother is Mrs. Walker, the woman who owns the house we live in, and I've been hiding my wealth because I wanted to see if you would love me for who I truly am. Not for my money or my background." Sophie sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he had just said. Mrs. Walker, the woman who had been kind to her, was his mother. And all this time James had been living like a humble worker, keeping his true identity hidden from everyone, including Sophie. It didn't make sense to her at first. She had always believed James was just like her, working hard and struggling to make ends meet. But now she understood James had kept his wealth a secret, Not because he was ashamed of it, but because he didn't want anyone to see him as just another rich man trying to use his status to win affection. At first, Sophie was shocked too, stunned to speak. Her mind raced with questions. Why had James kept this from her? Had he been lying to her all along? The feelings of betrayal bubbled up inside her, and for a moment she felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting. But then, as she looked into James's eyes, she saw something that calmed her, a sincerity, a vulnerability, and above all, a man who was trying to be honest with her, even if it meant risking everything. She could see the weight of the secret in his eyes, and she realized that James had only hidden the truth because he wanted her to love him for who he was, not for what he had. Sophie's initial shock began to fade, replaced by understanding. "I'm sorry." James continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted you to see me as I am, not as someone with money or status. I wanted to know if you would love me for my heart, for the person I am inside, not for the things I could give you." Sophie reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. She could feel the sincerity in his words, and despite the shock of learning the truth, she found herself forgiving him. "James," she said softly, "I understand you didn't want to hide anything from me, but you were afraid of how I might see you. I know that now." Sophie paused, looking down at their intertwined hands. "I don't care about your wealth. I care about you, the man who has shown me kindness, respect, and love. That's what matters to me." The air between them seemed to shift, the tension lifting as Sophie's words sank in. James looked at her, his face softening with relief. "You're not angry?" he asked, his voice tentative. Sophie smiled gently. "No, I'm not angry. I'm just surprised, that's all. I never imagined you were hiding something like this." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But what matters is that you've been true to me in your actions, James. You've never treated me like I'm less than you. You've respected me, loved me for who I am, and that's something I'll never take for granted." Over the next few days, Sophie's heart settled as she reflected on James's confession. She found herself growing even more fond of him, not for his wealth, but for the man he was, someone who valued love and respect above all else. Their relationship had always been built on these principles, and nothing, not even his wealth, could change that. Sophie continued to support James as he worked toward his dream of starting his own business, a dream he had carried for years. She admired his ambition and determination, and as they spent more time together discussing their hopes for the future, she realized just how deeply she had come to love him. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger, and Sophie felt more connected to James than ever before. She knew now that their love was real, built on mutual trust and understanding. James had shown her that true love wasn't about money or status. It was about standing by each other no matter the circumstances. Sophie supported James's dream with all her heart, believing in his vision and the future they could build together. And as they walked this new path side by side, Sophie couldn't help but feel grateful for the love they had found. Despite the shock of James's revelation, Sophie had come to realize that the wealth he had kept hidden didn't matter at all. It was the man he was that had captured her heart. James and Sophie's life took an unexpected turn for the better after James revealed his true identity. The couple had already built a strong foundation on mutual respect, trust, and love. But now, with James's wealth no longer hidden, they were able to move forward in ways they had never dreamed of. The first change came when Sophie decided to pursue her dreams of becoming a medical doctor. She had always loved learning, but had put her education on hold for years due to the struggles in her past. Now, with James's unwavering support, Sophie enrolled in university. The transition wasn't easy. She'd been away from school for so long, but her determination fueled her every step. James was there beside her, supporting her with everything she needed. He helped her study, encouraged her during tough exams, and even took care of the household responsibilities, making sure she had the time and peace of mind to focus on her studies. It was a new chapter in Sophie's life, one that she had longed for but never thought would be possible. As Sophie worked her way through medical school, she couldn't help but feel grateful for the life she was now living. The memories of her difficult past seemed like a distant nightmare, something she had overcome with the help of James's love and support. Their days were filled with laughter, joy, and the comfort of knowing they had each other. They celebrated small victories together, Sophie passing her exams, James expanding his business, and their growing connection as a couple. And as if the universe itself was rewarding them for their perseverance, Sophie found out she was pregnant. It was a surprise, but a welcomed one. The couple was overjoyed at the news, and they spent the months leading up to the baby's arrival, preparing for their new life as a family. The day their baby was born was one of the happiest days of their lives. Sophie gave birth to a healthy baby, and as James held their newborn child in his arms, tears of joy filled his eyes. They were no longer just a couple. They were a family. James vowed to always protect and care for his new family, and Sophie, with her heart full of love, couldn't wait to begin this new chapter with her baby and James by her side. The joy of becoming parents brought them even closer together, strengthening the bond they shared. Their new home, a luxurious mansion they had moved into, thanks to James's success, was a place of warmth and love. The house was grand, but it was filled with the kind of peace and happiness that Sophie had never known. Every room echoed with laughter and the pitter-patter of little feet as their child grew and thrived in the safe and loving environment James and Sophie had created together. Sophie's career as a doctor blossomed as well. She graduated with honors and quickly found work at a reputable hospital where she made a name for herself as a compassionate and skilled physician. Her journey had been long, but it had been worth every struggle. James was always there to cheer her on, and he often accompanied her to medical conferences or events, proudly supporting her accomplishments. He had always believed in her potential, and now, as the world recognized her talent, Sophie felt a deep sense of fulfillment. James, too, had become a public figure, now known as a billionaire. He used his wealth to invest in meaningful projects, especially those related to healthcare education and social justice. Together they made a powerful team their love and shared vision for the future, making them an unstoppable force for good. Despite their newfound wealth and success, Sophie and James never lost sight of what mattered most to them: each other and the family they were building. They created a life filled with love, laughter, and happiness. James often promised Sophie that he would spoil her and their child forever, but Sophie didn't need the luxury or the grandeur that came with James's wealth. What mattered most to her was the life they had built together, one of mutual respect, kindness, and unwavering support. As their child grew, Sophie and James were there for every milestone, from the first steps to the first day of school. Their home was a sanctuary where love and laughter were the main ingredients for a happy life. Years passed, and their life together only grew richer in love and experience. They traveled the world, explored new places, and shared countless moments of joy. Sophie continued her medical career, finding fulfillment in helping others, while James expanded his business ventures, using his wealth to create opportunities for those who needed it most. But through it all, they never lost sight of what truly mattered: their love for each other and the life they had built together. James had once promised to spoil Sophie and their child forever, but in reality, it was Sophie who had spoiled him with her unwavering love, her strength, and her resilience. They both knew that their happiness wasn't defined by wealth or success. It was defined by the love they shared, the family they had created, and the life they were living together. Sophie and James had found their happily ever after, not in the form of riches or grand achievements, but in the everyday moments they shared. It wasn't about what they had, but who they were and the life they had chosen to build. Together they had found peace, fulfillment, and the kind of love that lasts forever. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring tales of love, perseverance, and transformation, make sure to subscribe to Deep Inside HQ. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you captivating stories that explore the power of human resilience, the beauty of relationships, and the lessons that life teaches us. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community of viewers who believe in the power of love and change. Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us what you'd like to see next.